I love deduction games. That mental challenge of putting together a whole bunch of information to get an answer, to put it on my Deerstalker cap and figure out a mystery or get an answer after putting together a whole bunch of clues. It is just such a fun, satisfying, unique experience. But those games also come with a downside sometimes. It can be really brain burny and a really high mental load to put all that information together to get an answer. And sometimes if you had a long day at work or school, you don't necessarily want to input all of that effort, but maybe you do want to have that little bit of a puzzle. What if there was a game that could be enjoyed both casually and by that one friend that figured out the plot of Knives Out within the first 5 minutes of the movie? Well, that's where I think that logic and lore from Weird Giraffe Games fits a really nice niche in that deduction landscape. Now, this is a game of constellation alignment where players are going to have 9 cards face down in front of them, numbered 1 through 9, with the goal to align them in ascending order. So what are you going to do to start putting together the information to actually start aligning these cards correctly? Well, the sequence of stuff you're going to do in your turn is pretty straightforward, and I'll show you real quick the type of questions you're going to be able to ask to start to learn what these cards are. So on your turn, you're going to have a chance to move any face down cards. And of course, that's going to make sense as you start to get some more information of why you might want to do that first on your turn. Now, the next thing you can optionally do is reveal all of these cards. If they're all in order from 1 through 9, you immediately win. If any of them are wrong, you immediately lose. Now, the next couple steps are where you're actually going to start getting some information to learn about your cards. So the first thing you're going to do is choose focus. And what that means is that you're going to choose 2 of these face down cards, show them to your opponent, and you're going to ask them a series of questions that they have to answer truthfully. So now I'm going to take 2 of these cards, and I'm going to show them to you guys. And please shout as loud as you can into your phone or computer if this is true or false. Are these cards aligned? And what alignment means is that are they in the right spot corresponding to the middle row of numbers? So is this a 9? It is a 9. So you would say yes. Is this a 4? It is not a 4. So you would say yes, one of these cards are aligned, and you would point to it. So from my perspective, I have no idea what this number 1 card is, so I would put it face down, and then you would tell me, yes, that card is aligned, and it immediately goes face up. Now, if you ever get a positive response to any of the questions that you ask, your turn immediately ends. Now, I'm going to pick another set of 2 cards just to give you an example of the other questions you're going to be able to ask. So let's take these 2 cards, for example, a 2 and an 8. So the first thing I'm going to ask is, are they aligned? And no, they're not. The 2 is in the 8 spot and the 8's in the 2 spot. The next thing you're going to do is ask, are these 2 numbers sequential? Right, is it 2 and 3, is it 4 and 5, so on and so forth. And of course, 2 and 8 are not sequential, so you would say no. Now the next question you're going to ask is, are they symmetrical? And what that means in this game is, do they add up to 10? And of course, 8 and 2 do add up to 10, so you would say yes. So I would put these cards back face down where I picked them up from, and then I would take 2 tokens from the shared pile over here and put the 2 symmetrical tokens on these cards as a little bit of a reminder that these 2 cards equal 10. You can also have a piece of scrap paper if you prefer, however you want to keep track of the information. But these little tokens are provided with the game, and they're able to help you as you go along to, remember what your cards are. Now, the last question I could have asked is, which of the 2 numbers is bigger? And that is typically the last question you're going to ask. Now, that might not be the most helpful, but it does give you some information. What I really like is that there's never a turn where you feel like you never get nothing, right? You're always going to get a little bit of information, even if it's just figuring out which of the 2 numbers is bigger. I like that very positive that very positive playthrough that you have, that you're always learning something. It never feels like you wasted a turn. It's kind of just like, oh, well, I'm falling behind now. So after you focus and answer the questions for those 2 cards, you'll have one more chance on your turn to rearrange those 2 cards. In this case, right, I know that they add up to 10, but I have no idea what they are, so, I know that they're not aligned, so maybe I might switch the 2 of them, right? Maybe this is 2, and maybe this is 8. Who knows? So that's going to be your last thing that you do in your turn. The Play will then switch to your opponent, who will then pick 2 cards. You'll answer those questions, and play will go back and forth as players continue to reveal their cards, and the first player to get from 1 through 9 is going to be the winner. Now, that might seem pretty straightforward and good, right? You ask these 4 questions, you get a little bit of information, you line up those cards. I know that the hardcore deduction folks out there might say, that seems a little rudimentary. I could do that in my sleep. Now, I have some good news for you, because the game that I described up to so far is the Starlight version. Essentially, there are 2 sets of questions that you can use in this game. The Starlight version is very much those 4 questions. They're pretty straightforward, and you get the information you get and you go from there. If you want a little bit of a deeper experience, there's another side to these reference cards. And this is called the Star Bright version of the game. And this is where, for me, it went from a weekday game, a weeknight game where I just want to casually play, very cozy, to much more of a heavier deduction game. And I think that it's a beautiful thing that this game is so adaptable that it can be played both as a heavy deduction game or as a very much a lighter little game. And so when you flip over all of these number cards, you're going to notice that on the opposite side of the middle row, there's a whole bunch of questions. And any astute watchers, you may have noticed there's a bunch of little tokens on this side of the table as well. I've been wondering, what are those used for? Well, in the Star Bright version of the game, the questions are going to work a little bit differently. Now, you could see on the numbers here, 1 through 9, there's different questions. So in the Star Bright version of the game, the 2 questions you're always going to have access to is the number 1, which is, are they aligned, right? If it's in the right spot, you flip it over, all is good with the world. And the number 9 question is point to the greatest. So that was the other question I had shared with you guys before. But the numbers in the middle, 2 through 8, you're going to be fighting over with your opponent. So at the beginning of your turn in Star Bright version, you'll put your player color on one of those questions, and it's going to unlock that question for you to be able to ask your opponent on your turn. However, as these start to get taken up, and once they're all filled up, it's going to add a little bit of more of a confrontation element to it, because you're going to have the chance to actually knock off an opponent's little token and cut off their access to that question. So if there's a question you feel like your opponent's really getting value out of, you can boop them right off of it, and then you have access to that question. And so it adds a really interesting interactive element, and sometimes your opponent is getting way more value out of a question than you are, but you're still able to kind of force them out of it. And if that is not enough, there's also a couple extra cards in here. And these are the black hole cards. And what these do is that there's up to 3 of them that can be put into the game, and they get shuffled into the 9 cards. And every question you ask about a black hole is always no. So they are just these empty voids of information that you're going to have to snuff out to get them out of your row. Because the goal with the black holes is that you want them to be at the very edge of your constellation here. You got to get them all out of the way and still align from 1 through 9. So they add even a more difficult wrinkle. You can make this game as easy or as difficult as you want to. This game is just incredibly approachable, and it feels like it could fit, anyone who even is kind of interested in deduction. It feels interactive without being too confrontational, and it just feels really, really nice. It's weird for a game to be about stars and constellations to be cozy, right? It's not that kind of warm, foresty feeling you get, but it is like, astrologically cozy, I guess you could call it. And it just makes for a really, really nice experience. These tokens are nice. They're very easy to keep track of the information. But like I said, when we were playing on Star Bright, we were kind of both using our own little scratch paper just to keep track of it a little more easily, and that worked well for us. And I think that overall, just logic and lore fits so many niches. If you want a light deduction game on a weeknight, like I said, you could play the Starlight version and just play the simplified version. If you want to really buckle down and play something a little bit more difficult and a little bit crunchier, you can play the Star Bright version. And then if you want to go crazy, you can add a whole bunch of the black hole cards in. So I really love the scaling difficulty. I think they really knocked it out of the park at how many levers you have to pull to make the game as easy or as hard as you want to the point that there's even suggestions that if one person wants to play on Star Bright and the other wants to play on Starlight version, you can mix and match them. There's even rules for if kids younger than 10 are playing, they reveal the number that corresponds to their age. So if you have any 1-year-olds that are playing this, they can start with the 1 revealed. And so I really enjoyed my time with Logic and Lore. I think it's going to be a nice weekday rotation game. You know, after work, just set it up, play a round or two, and it was just really, really enjoyable. My wife and I just really, truly enjoyed it. And then, you know, if it's a weeknight or a weekend night rather, and we want something a little bit longer and a little bit more intensive, the Star Bright version is right there waiting for us. Now, I would like to say real quick, you may notice that there's a whole bunch of cat tokens. This is a prototype version, so the tokens are going to be different. Some of this symbology might be a little bit different. So whatever you see here, take with a grain of salt. But for what they have so far, I really, really enjoy the aesthetic and look of the game so far. But I do want to mention that this is still a prototype version. Things are subject to change. I'd also like to thank Weird Giraffe Games for providing this prototype copy. And while they did provide the game, the opinions are all my own. And if you guys have any questions about Logic and Lore, please let me know in the comments below and I'll be happy to answer them. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you on the next video.